from the Second Age of Reason. We're coming to you from Wisconsin, but I'm going to talk about a topic from California. As the elections are nearly here, they have a proposition, or Referendum 37, which would require that foods containing genetically modified organisms, GMOs, be labeled as such. So it could say, well, here's a food, and it says, contains GMOs. Or maybe in more detail, here's your cornflakes, contains genetically modified corn. Or genetically modified sugar from sugar beets. And so they want to have the food labeled so you know what you're eating, what you're putting into your mouth. Maybe even for other, like, personal products, you might want to know if the hand cream has genetically modified components to it. And there's a great controversy over this. It is kind of a close race, and I don't know why. I would think everybody would want to know if they're eating mutants or not, or spreading them on your skin. And there's several reasons for that, because some of the tests that they've done, while at first they proved to seem harmless because they only were testing for 90 days, when the tests went for the full lifespan of the creatures being tested, they did come down with very adverse effects. Maybe things like tumors, or cancers, or organ failures, and other such things. So I just thought I would urge you Californians to please vote to have your food labeled properly so that you can tell if it's genetically modified or not. The opposition wants to not label it in order, as they would say, to save you money, because they will save a fraction of a cent on putting it on the label. But they have to put labels on things anyway. And nobody's made any beef about putting the warnings on cigarettes. So why would they make a beef about putting something on a can of vegetables to say, well, these carrots are genetically modified, and you pour them out and they're blue. Well, you know what I mean. So I'm just urging you to vote for that. And there's some other things I'd like to bring out as maybe peripheral issues. There's different kinds of genetically modified. I mean, there's a whole spectrum of it, and they mean different things. I mean, some of it started way back when with the likes of, like, Luther Burbank, who did flower hybrid development, where you take the pollen from this flower and that flower, and you put it to mix it together, and you get different varieties of flower, or fruit, or vegetable. Or even amongst living creatures, you would take, say, a Pekingese and a Chihuahua and get a Pikachu. Well, maybe not exactly, but anyway, I mean, that's just normal hybrid and crossbreeding. That is a sort of genetic modification, because it wouldn't normally happen unless humans interfered with it. There's more invasive kinds, which includes, like, gene splicing, and maybe even getting into, you know, stem cells, where you grow different kinds of tissue or organs from genetically modified things. I believe they've even tried to patent some life forms, some animal species and some plants, and they'll say, well, they're not any different than the original. And you go, well, if they're not any different, how do they qualify for a patent? Because to qualify for a patent, you need to show that there is some improvement, some novelty, something about it that you've done and researched and produced that needs a patent protection to it. So it is different. It has to be. Or else the patent has to be ruled invalid. They wouldn't do that, would they? So I just thought I would mention that. Secondly, I want to just warn you about referendums. I mean, we've had them here in Wisconsin, and the referendum in 2010 passed with 70%, which is amazing. But the powers that be, business, got an injunction against the referendum results and said, we don't like it. And then in the process, while that was an injunction to stop it, they got the judges to rule that it was an improper question to have on the referendum and threw it out entirely. And which is funny because they normally have to vet referendum items before they get on the ballot and get printed a million times. So just beware of that too in your Proposition 37. But back to the science of it, and some of the genetic modification types. There are some that are what you would call immune to things. They breed the strength into a species so that it is immune to a pesticide or poison. So they can put this plant in, spray it with tons of poison, and all the surrounding plants die, but this one will live. And, okay, so you've got a crop free of weeds. They harvest it, but do they get the poison off the plant? How much is it already leached into the cells? And then you're consuming that. There are some plants, and whatever, that they have bred so that the organism by its own metabolism produces a poison against its normal predators and pests and the pests and predators, and it produces its own poison, and so then you eat that. And then the question is, you get that same poison, or do you assimilate the genomes that produce poisons and you produce them yourself, and maybe it's harmful to you? I don't know if they've done that for a long-term study. And also there's mutagens, which is along that line too. They have things that mutate creatures, so maybe it produces a creature that cannot reproduce itself anymore. They're sterile. Is that a probability that property could make its way to the human race, leading to mass sterility and eventually extinction? And finally, I just would point out that there's been people noticing that the bees are dying off, and they may be dying off because of problems in these GMOs, that the bees get that genetically modified pollen, and it either tastes yucky or it's noxious, and it makes the bees sick, confused, and die off. And you say, well, what's the deal about bees? People don't want to be stung by bees, but people like to eat honey. And bees are needed for a great deal of pollination. So there's a great chance that if the bees all die off, you could have massive famines. That's also an unpleasant scenario. And anything else about GMOs? Well, finally, I just want to encourage California to vote for the labeling. You can then not buy the genetically modified and hopefully let the market decide if you want them or not. And lastly, you're going to have a rude awakening if it does go through and the labeling goes on, and you look at the labels, you're going to see something you hadn't quite anticipated. You're going to see that maybe 98% or everything that's in the store has some genetically modified thing in it. And to back out of that was going to be really, really hard. The massive seeds in circulation may be vastly contaminated, and you may have trouble going back to the non-GMO. But knowing that you have this problem and making it obvious is the first step. And just letting it go on and on and on until it's too late is maybe not something you care to fathom. So I just thought I'd mention that. Good luck with Proposition 37, California. And until later, we'll be seeing you.